I just want to make sure that you know you are welcome here. So if Heights is home, welcome. We love you. We love journeying together. If this is new for you and you're like, I'm not sure about this, I'm here because of something happened in my life, or I'm here simply because I just am checking out this church thing, and welcome to you. And we just want you to know we love you a bunch right out the gate. Now, if you are here and you heard Zach right up top, you saw us last week, you know that we are heading into a series called The Dark Side of the Moon. Can I give you a full disclaimer? I did not know it was a Pink Floyd album, okay? But all in all, it's just another brick in the wall, you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, true story. I did not know. All I knew was the album by the cover. It's so iconic that I was like, oh, I didn't know that's what that album was called. So there you go. So if you came last week and you're like, oh, they're doing Dark Side of the Moon, no way, Pink Floyd, you're going to be super disappointed because there is no Pink Floyd. So there you go. But we are going to talk about the Dark Side of the Moon. This series is a little different. I'm going to be honest with you. It's a little different. Normally when we start a series, we'll have our anchor verse and we'll unpack that, and we'll unpack the big idea around the moon, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But we're probably not going to unpack our anchor verse until like week 4, because we got some stuff we got to go through. And today, we're going to journey through some stuff. By the end of it, hopefully it makes sense. And next week, those of you that remember Brad Streeter, Pastor Brad, who used to lead worship, he's going to be here next week, and we're going to talk about his story, which I'm just so excited for. And so those of you that don't know Brad, you'll fall in love with him quickly. And then the next week, we have some other stuff planned that leads us further into this whole series. And then week 4, we'll get to unpacking what is our theme verse. And today, I want you to think this way, that today's about invitation. That today's about invitation for you with God. And what I mean by this is our anchor verse is found in Psalm 139, and we're just going to take the first part of it of, search me, O God, and know my heart. That today is about the invitation from you to let God into that premise of, God, I need you to search me. God, I want you to know my heart. And as we unpack this further over the weeks to come, it's this idea that your heart is the center point of who you are. And what you're doing is going, God, I want to invite you into that space. I want to invite you into that place. I need you to know something before we get anywhere today. I need you to know that you are not in this room by chance today. You're not in this room by chance. I believe with everything I've got, you may be like, man, I stumbled in here. God knows that you were going to stumble into here. You may be here and you're in the same seat you've been in for the last decade because it's your seat. Y'all know who you are. Just saying. But God knew you would be in that seat today. And I just need you to know something right out top, that I'm believing with everything I've got that God has something for you today. Okay? God has something for you. And I'll take the pressure off of those of you that came with somebody. You don't got to be the Holy Spirit for them. Meaning you don't got to nudge them when you're like, oh, that was for you. We're going to trust that the Holy Spirit nudges them today, okay? We're going to have a little more trust that God's got this. But I believe that every single one of you in this room across different locations, God's got something for you today. And I believe as we go through this series, if you'll let him, he's got some beautiful work. I believe it's going to transform our church. And I know that's big, lofty goals and whatever, but I really do believe that God has some amazing work to do in us. And so we're going to start with a familiar story in Luke chapter 8. If you have a Bible or a screen, you can turn to it. But in Luke chapter 8, there's a context we're going to dive into. And the context is Jesus has had a long day. Okay, so Jesus has been on a boat, and that boat, there was a storm, and all he's trying to do is take a nap, and they wake him up, and they're panicked, and as only Jesus can, he gets up and he calms the storm. And then when he gets to where they were going in the boat, the other side of the lake, when he gets there, a madman comes out, and he's demon-possessed. And what happens is Jesus essentially takes the demons and puts them in a bunch of pigs. The pigs run off a cliff, and then there's a whole bunch of farmers that are mad at Jesus, but the man is healed. And so the man's like, take me with you. Don't leave me with the angry people. And Jesus is like, no, you got to stay. I got to go. And so Jesus gets in a boat, and he goes back across to the other side of the lake. And when he gets to the other side is where we're going to pick up verse 40. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. A crowd welcomes Jesus. They've heard about this Jesus. They know he's changing lives. I would couple it with that you're sat in a crowd this morning, right? And some of you, maybe you chose this church and you chose this crowd because you're able to come in and sneak in one door and sneak out the other door, and nobody ever saw you other than Jesus, right? And that's the way you want it. But the reality is you're in a crowd. And so instantly we have a context that we can relate to, going, hey, there's a crowd and they're gathering around this Jesus for a reason. And as the story continues, then it says, then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. And so if you're been around church much or the Bible much, you probably heard this story, but today we got to build the context and the picture. You got to feel this story. Because in this context, you got a dad who is coming, and his desperation to get to Jesus is, my only daughter is dying. And so the desperation, the expectancy is, I'm going to push through this crowd, which we were having a conversation this week. Pastor Owen in our teaching prep said, I wonder, because he was a synagogue leader, I wonder if the crowd parted easily for him, or if they made way for him because he was a man of status. We don't know for sure, but we know that it was easy for him to get in the presence of Jesus at his feet and request, plead with Jesus, would you come heal my daughter? There's imagine the desperation. Your child is dying, and you're going, I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that Jesus knows. I'm going to do whatever I can. And what he's essentially saying in this moment is, remember, he's a synagogue leader. He's saying everything that I have from the church side, from the knowledge side, from the religion side can't help this moment with my daughter. I need Jesus. And so he pushes his way through the crowd. I love what it says next. It says that he was there, about 12, was dying, as Jesus was on his way. I just need you to catch one thing real quick. This is kind of like a side stop in our journey together. If you ever ask Jesus for something, you need to know he's moving towards you. Not only does he see you, he has actively been pursuing you for all of your history. And he's not stopping. And I love that this man comes and requests, and the very next thing we get is as Jesus is on his way, as he's moving towards, as he's fulfilling requests. And so Jesus is moving, and the crowds almost crushed him. Okay, catch again. We got to feel what's happening, right? So this man comes, he's in desperation. He's probably got tears. He's pleading with Jesus. Jesus is now on his way. And what happens is the crowd becomes so much that they are pressing into Jesus, that they are almost crushing him. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd like that. It reminds me of growing up in England. We used to go to soccer games, right? And back then, the soccer games, they didn't have seats in the stadium. They had what they called terraces. And so the terraces was, you just stood on them. And so they just kept letting people in, and they let people in, and they let people in. And so you were packed. Literally, I can remember as a boy being in one stadium and a fire broke out because it was a wood stadium, broke out underneath. But you were in a crowd, and literally you just went where the crowd went, right? You're not picking, I prefer to go to that exit. Like the crowd is moving, you are moving with it. You are packed in so tightly. I remember being in the same crowd, and a goal was scored, and everybody just pushes forward. It didn't matter if you were at row 15, you ended up at row 5, right? You just went with it because the crowd was moving you along, right? The crowd is moving, and that's the image we're given with Jesus. Have you ever been on a subway, whether in London, New York, especially if you travel to like India, like when you get on that subway, you are packed, and when they decide to leave, you leave with them because you're just going, right? That's the idea of this, that Jesus is on his way, and the crowd is so tight that they're almost crushing him, and they're being moved by him. That's the imagery that's given here. It's so packed in. They're pressing. Many, many, many people pressing in. And a woman, verse 43, and a woman who was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. Now, I would love to slow down. Remember, it's about feeling this story. I heard a preacher just this past week on this story in particular. And he was talking about empathizing with the woman, and he was trying to put it in a way that could potentially help us. And I thought, man, that's a really good way to put it. But he was saying, imagine if you had a gash on your inner thigh, and no matter what you do, it will not stop bleeding. And then couple that with, now in that culture, blood made you unclean. The exposure of blood made you unclean. And so what unclean meant is that now you were ceremonially unclean, meant that you couldn't be around people, you couldn't be in contact with people, you couldn't go to the temple and worship. And so now you were essentially ostracized from your community, from your people, from your why, because you had this bleeding issue that you couldn't stop. But if you imagine a gash on your inner thigh that won't stop, and I understand, like let's not dumb down the pain that this lady's experiencing, because this is internal. This is something she can't control. She can't even see. But for 12 years, it's dominated her life. And the idea of that gash on your leg, you wrap it in gauze. How long does it take before the blood gets through the gauze? And so now your entire 12 years of your life, you're going place to place to place to place, and you're timing, how long do I have before this thing bleeds through and everybody knows, and now I'm going to be shamed publicly for being in the spaces I shouldn't be. That I have just this many hours to be able to do what I need to do. That is this woman's experience. That is her life. I think it's fascinating that the girl who's dying is 12 years old. We would all go, that's too young, too soon. And for this lady, she's been bleeding for 12 years, and we go, that's too long. Isn't it fascinating, our view on time? I wonder this, that how many of you today need to just understand that God sees time different? And whatever your journey's been, today's perfect. Today's the day. That today's the day that God's going to do something miraculous in your life. And this moment with this lady and her bleeding, she's in desperation. You can imagine 12 years. And she sees the crowd. And she knows technically she's not supposed to touch him, but she has to get to Jesus. And I wonder, just my imagination, I wonder if she's like scoping out the crowd, like waiting for my moment. I'm going to get him. And she's down an alleyway because she knows they're going to come down this alleyway, and she's waiting. And as she sees her moment, she begins to press into the crowd. But she's not interested in being in a crowd. She's interested in getting to the person. And so she pushes her way through, and eventually at some point, and I wonder if she was on hands and knees at this point, reaching out as far as she could, and she just touches. Just touches. She doesn't grab. She doesn't hold on to. She doesn't get attention. It's as his cloak goes by, she touches one of the tassels that rabbis would have had on the bottom, it's believed. And it's just a touch. And there's no thunder and lightning. There's no, oh, from the angels. But she knows. Because if you've been bleeding for 12 years, you know when you've been healed. And she knows immediately that touch of Jesus' tassels, his clothing, she's healed. When was the last time you were that desperate for Jesus? When was the last time that you had a holy expectancy of what Jesus could do? No, I mean it. I mean it. Like you woke up today. Here's what's crazy. You woke up today, and it's a Sunday. And if you got kids, they started school already. So your schedule's been a little hectic. You woke up, you're like, we should go to church. And you drove here. Maybe you had a fight on the way. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you're just catching your breath on the way here. You get your kids in, or maybe you got through the door because you rushed here and you got to your seat and you sat down and you're like, man, he's already preaching. This doesn't normally happen. What's going on? But what happened to entering the space going, think about it for a second. The creator of the universe, God, in all his majesty and all his sovereignty and all his majesticness, if that's a word, he is here today, right now, with you. Like he made you here. God showed up here for you today. And you're going to walk in like, it's another Sunday. Can't wait to get the In-N-Out later. But he's here now for you. And I got to ask you, are you just part of the crowd that's pressing? Or are you the one that's going, I'm so desperate, I need God to show up today, that I'm going to reach out, I'm going to make sure I touch him today, because I can't leave here the same as I walk through these doors. You see, sometimes I think we forget. We forget how much we need a Savior because we forget how much we're a sinner. Sometimes I think we forget how messed up we really are. We're broken. We are desperate. We need Jesus as much today as ever. But somehow we get in this church world and we go, well, I met Jesus when I was 5. I've been walking with Jesus for a while. I've been in church for 20 years. I've been clean. I don't cuss. I don't hang out with those that do. I don't watch that on TV. And somehow we think we're something. And what Jesus is doing is going, hey, there's so much more that I want to get to. I'm with this lady. Verse 45, who touched me? Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, remember Peter, our last series, always ready to speak up, tell it like it is, Master, the people, in case you hadn't noticed, are crowding and pressing against you. What is he really saying? Jesus, we're in a crowd. What do you mean, who touched you? Jesus, come on, you can't be serious. Imagine you're going along, and all of a sudden Jesus stops and everybody, Why we stop? I don't know. Why we stop? Ask him. And Jesus goes, who's touched me? Are you kidding, Jesus? Are you being serious right now? Who touched you? Well, I could pick about 40 people. And he stays stopped. This is what I love about Jesus. He's not in a rush. We're in a rush. He's not in a rush. Verse 46, but Jesus said, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. What is he saying? There's a whole bunch of people that want to press and want to crowd and want to crush me, but only one person deliberately has touched me. I wonder today, are you in the crowd that's just here because it's a crowd and because it seems like the right thing to do, and so you're here and you're pressing in and you're in the crowd? Or are you the one that Jesus is going, but no, someone touched me because I felt power go out? Then the woman seeing that she could not go unnoticed. It got awkward. That's what that's saying. Like if you want a literal translation, it got awkward. Because what happened is Jesus stopped and he made a scene. And this woman who was trying to sneak out the back, like I got what I wanted, Jesus won't let her go. The woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. If you're looking for a title for the sermon because you're the person taking notes, the title is this: what about that? What about that? Because what Jesus just did is he just told the woman, what about that? Oh, I know you came for physical healing, is what Jesus is saying. But there's a whole lot more here that is under the surface that we need to heal. You see, because if you put yourself in the woman's shoes, you realize that what she's been going through is she's been shamed for a long time. And so shame is now a part of her story. The fact that she doesn't feel like she belongs. So every time she goes out, she doesn't belong to anybody. She can't touch anybody. She can't be around anybody. You can imagine the level of unacceptance that comes with that, the feeling of I don't belong anywhere that comes with that, and the amount of guilt that comes with I have to go out because I have to be able to do things. And so now there's this guilt associated with it. In the midst of that, she's in deep pain, and in the midst of it, she's lonely and isolated. And what Jesus does is he goes, what about those things? Because I care about healing those things, not just the physical. He's looking into her soul and going, I know you came for physical healing. I know that's what you think you need, but what you need is a healing of your heart and your soul. And he begins to reach into that. And listen to these words. He says, daughter, daughter. That's a term that's intimate. That's a term that says you belong. That's a term that provides security. That's a term that should drop all association of guilt and shame and unacceptance. Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. You know what the word peace is in the original? It's wholeness. It's completeness. What he's telling her in this moment is, hey, everything that is broken on the inside of you that is creating anxiety, which means to be torn into pieces, everything that is tearing you to pieces, you need to know, I see it, and you are healed. Go in peace. He healed what she didn't know needed to be healed. All of this reminds me of the moon. Which some of you are like, wow, we finally got to the moon. It reminds me of the moon. The moon, as you'll see, you might recognize it because we live in Arizona. Unless you're somewhere on location in Hawaii, I don't know. But in Arizona, something interesting happens. At night, particularly where we live, you can walk outside. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but sometimes you walk outside and you catch a glimpse of the moon and you go, wow. Sometimes you will just find me, this is a true story, you'll just find me standing outside in a parking lot like. Because if you have not been shocked by the moon, you have not lived. It's amazing. And for some reason, they feel bigger in Arizona. Like sometimes the size of the moon, I'm like, I got to get a picture with my phone. I take my phone out, and then the picture's this big. Right? But did you know that the moon is roughly 239,000 miles away? Here's what's crazy. Your eyeballs can see it. What? And you can see it with better detail than you can capture on a picture. Do you know that the moon is roughly a quarter size of the earth? That the moon actually rotates, but the moon is tidally locked in rotation to the earth? Which what that means is that they call it synchronous rotation. And it's when two things are they're in the same orbital, but they're going at the same pace in the period. And so what happens is as they're turning and they rotate around each other, what it means for us on planet Earth is that when we look at the moon, we only ever see one side of the moon. You've never seen the other side of the moon in person from the earth. And some of you are like, John, you're just figuring this out? Well, if you know this and you know how cool this is, you'll never go outside and look at the moon the same again. Because here's what it means, right? That for all of human history, we've looked up into the sky at the moon, and we only see one aspect, one piece of it. But what's existed the whole time is this other side, the far side of the moon, the dark side of the moon from us, right? And it wasn't until 1968 when a group of astronauts got onto the Apollo 8 rocket and they took off with a purpose of going around the moon. It would be the first humans that got to see the far side of the moon, the dark side of the moon. And when they took off, they got pictures. They're not very good, so we got some later pictures to show you. But the backside of the moon is fascinating. So on the right, you have the backside of the moon. On this side, that's what we see from our vantage point on the left side. But on the right side, as you look at it, you go, it doesn't look so bad. But what you need to understand is the backside of the moon, the far side of the moon, is pocked by craters. And we don't know if it's been protecting Earth. We don't know how those craters got there, what debris in space has been hitting it. But some of those craters are massive. Some of those craters are 85 miles wide by 30,000 feet deep. And so much so that some of those craters, you could take the Grand Canyon and put them inside of it. And so the backside of the moon has all this damage from impact, external impacts to it. And yet what we see from our side is this glowing, bright moon. And there's a whole nother side that's hidden from us. I wonder how much of us, if not all of us, are just like the moon. Here's what I mean. You come to church and you look real good. You look real good. You do yourself up. Some of you. Just kidding. You roll in. You get asked at the door, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine. How are you doing? And yet you got a dark side to your heart. You got a dark side to your moon. And it's tearing you apart. And you won't let anybody see it. You go through your day and you're just fine. And you, over and over and over, know that there's a deep, dark secret in your heart. You need to know that Jesus with this lady goes, what about that? What about the shame, the insecurity, the guilt, the brokenness, the sin, the pain? And what we find with the moon is it wasn't until somebody journeyed to the dark side that the dark side was revealed. And this series is an invitation for you to journey and let Jesus journey with you into the dark side of your moon. If you're here and you go, John, I don't think I got one. I don't think there's a dark side to me. You're a liar. I'm just going to call it out. The reason I know is you're human and you're fallen, which means we got stuff. But it requires that we're willing to journey in and let God go into the deepest parts of our heart. Remember the search me and know me. And I love what happens if we're willing to go on this journey together. Because you know, right? You know, we have all these symptoms in our life of our dark side. You know this, right? Now, how do I know your drinking problem? Your drinking problem isn't really about alcohol. It's about something much deeper in you. And your porn addiction, it's not really about porn. It's about something much deeper inside of you on the dark side of your moon that you're compensating for. And your anger and what's tearing your family apart, the anger isn't really about your family. You know that, right? You're not actually angry at them. You just don't know how to cope with what's happening on the inside of you. And over these next 5 weeks, what we're doing is we're committing as a community to go, we're going to dig into this. We're going to let God do his perfect work. No matter how painful, no matter how far it goes. Why? Because something happens when you journey to the dark side of the moon. Here's what I mean. The story carries on then. You can imagine how Jairus is feeling, right? You know he's there and everybody stops and he's like, hey, but what about my daughter? While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, he said. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she will be healed." What is Jesus doing? Hey, synagogue leader. Hey, Mr. Religion. Hey, Mr. You stand up for a profession and lead a whole bunch of people. What about that? And what is Jairus' that? Hey, Jairus, you think I can heal your sick daughter, but you don't believe. You don't have the belief. You have unbelief now that I can raise her from the dead. Let's deal with your unbelief that's deep in your heart. Let's surface that. And so in this moment now, Jesus is pulled out of Jairus. He goes, hey, we're going to journey to the dark side of your moon where you just lost hope and you don't know who I am. When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he said to him, "Do not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, James, and the child's father and mother." Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But Jesus took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them, "Give her something to eat." Why? Because when you've been dead, you hungry. Okay? Jesus is giving her food. Why? Because he wants to prove she ain't a ghost. He has brought her back to life. He owns life and death. And in this moment, he's telling her, hey, I am the resurrection and the life. Hey, Jairus, you're over here, Mr. Religion. I want you to see this because we need to deal with your unbelief. So through the circumstances of your daughter, what I'm actually doing is surfacing the unbelief in your heart. Why? Because you need to see me as the resurrection and the life. I can bring back the dead if I want to. He needs to see Jesus for who he is. And I want you to catch what happens then, because he's taken Jairus to the dark side of his moon. Verse 56, her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened. Her parents were astonished. They were surprised. They had no box to put in what had just happened. They're impressed. And what's beautiful about this moment is it captures for us a truth that when you are willing to go to the dark side of the moon of your soul, when you get to see what God does in that space, you will be astonished and amazed. This was captured for us by the Apollo 8 crew. So the first humans that journey up. By the way, God saw it all the time. God sees the dark side of you all the time. But those first astronauts that were able to go up and go around the moon, and they see the dark side of the moon, right? And as they see it on the way back, they were invited to address the nation. It was Christmas Eve. And so from their spaceship, they record a message that goes back to, or they broadcast a message that goes back to Earth. But it's not just for a nation. This is for an entire humanity because everybody was tuned in at this point. And what they had to say after seeing the dark side of the moon, you can hear their astonishment. Here, take a listen.
We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and divided the light from the darkness.
Saw the dark side of the moon, and the message they had to send back to humanity was, don't miss the Creator. don't miss wow God. They didn't have anything to say of themselves other than let us read you scripture on who God is. Wait, they traveled how far? How many days? How many miles? How many bad meals? And they saw the other side of the moon, and on the way back, all they can talk about is God, the creator, and the majesty. And I wonder, church, if God doesn't want you to see him in a whole new way today. I wonder if God doesn't want to reach into the dark side of you today and surface some things. I believe he does. I believe you were created for intimacy with God Almighty. And I believe that intimacy is allowing him. He already sees it. But it's the invitation. Would you search me and know me, O God? Last month, it was about a month, just over a month ago, I got a call from my mom. And it was 6 a.m. in the morning, roughly, on Monday morning. You got a call from your mama at 6 a.m., it's never good. Not at my age. And she said, I need to tell you that your dad's in the hospital. She said he's in the ER and he's had a stroke. I said, well, how bad is it? She says, we don't know yet. We're waiting to get news. And I said, okay, I'll be over as soon as I can. And so I ended up at the hospital, and sure enough, my dad's in a room at that point, and I walk in, and he's lost all mobility on his right side. Fine the day before, he was in church, just like you, the day before. And he was actually teaching and leading people, and the next morning, 3 a.m. in the morning, we think it happened. And here he is, lost complete control of his right side. And sitting in that room, and through that first day especially, was God's grace, and that my dad was like a happy drunk. And what I mean by that, he was like a click behind the conversation, and his words were slurred. So whatever he said was funny because he was behind the beat, you know what I mean? And that humor helped us get through that first day because we just didn't know what this meant. And so then we come to realize it's pretty severe and it's going to take him time to recover. And I started to notice a pattern in me. My sister came in from out of town, and I started to notice a pattern in me that seemed unhealthy. And it went like this: I just want to be helpful. I just want to serve my mom. I just want to, and I kept interjecting myself into, can I help you make plans? Can I help you work through stuff? And every time I would get shut down. No, we got this. We're good. We got this. And I started to notice that there was this pain associated to the rejection. And I didn't know what to do with it. And I went and, it was a week ago, Thursday, I think it was. I went and sat with my counselor. And I began to unpack just what had happened over the past month. And I just, as I sat there unpacking it, I just felt God using this beautiful person in my life to begin to put words and explanation to what's going on with the pain and with the desires that I had. And she began to tell me a story. And she said it's taken from Brennan Manning's Abba's Child, and there's a station wagon going along the road. And the family's in the station wagon, and the car slows down just enough to open a door and kick the dog out. And then the door closes, the station wagon continues, the dog jumps up and begins to chase. And she said, you're chasing the car. And all of a sudden, over the last week, as I begin to unpack that, what I've noticed in me is something that started 38 years ago. And 38 years ago, there was a moment in my life. And since that moment, I can document through my life being a teenager and stealing stuff with my friends. Why? Because I need to be wanted. I need to be accepted. And a little later, heading into a porn addiction. It wasn't about porn. It was about my need to be wanted, my need to be accepted. And as I got a little older and now I've got a drinking problem, my drinking problem wasn't about the alcohol. It was about the acceptance and family and community that drinking created for me. And so now what started out of this unhealthy wanting to be wanted grew into this problem I couldn't handle anymore. And then God sets me free from that, and I get married, and I take all of that into marriage. And guess what I start to put on my wife? That she has to want me and accept me. Why? Because I'm trying to compensate for what's way back here. And all of a sudden, I go through all the years leading up to today, and I can see where my anger wasn't about anger. It was about this moment that I felt like this 9-year-old boy back here that's been abandoned. And I'm longing to be wanted. And all of a sudden I'm going, I know this series is coming, and I'm like, God, I got a dark side to my moon. And it's not easy and it's painful. But you need to know something today. That God has met me every step of that journey. And he's been faithful. Which gives me the confidence to stand here and go, if you will be willing, God will be faithful to you too. And as I progress forward, God has given me a beautiful healing that's coming. And I think for you, the longing of the dark side of the moon is, we all got stuff. Let's deal with our stuff and let Jesus heal us. But it starts with invitation. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Can Jesus have the dark side of your heart today? Will you let him? So I'm going to ask you to do something. If you're new to church, I promise we're not going to do anything weird. I promise. But for privacy and intimacy, because this moment is painful. This moment is yours. It's not anybody else's. This moment is yours to step into the light and go, I know I got stuff that I've been hiding. Or maybe you're in the room and you go, I don't know if I have stuff. But I want Jesus to have access if I do. Then I'm going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes across all locations. And when we do this, some of you are cheaters. Please don't cheat this morning. Don't stare at your neighbor or look at who's doing what. This is your moment. It's a holy moment. But with your eyes closed and your heads bowed, I want to ask you a question because I want to pray for you specifically today. So wherever you happen to be, whatever location, if you today go, I know I have a dark side that I need to be freed from. I know I have a dark side that I need to journey with Jesus. Then I'm going to ask you in a moment to just raise your hand so I can pray for you. That as we journey together, as we journey through this series, as Jesus journeys with us, as we go as a community, the prayer is that God heals us of what's broken. If you're in the room and you go, man, I don't know if I have a dark side, but I'm inviting Jesus into that space, I'm going to ask you also to raise your hand. So on the count of 3, if you know you got a dark side and you want to deal with it, or if you're in the room and go, I don't know, but I want Jesus to have full access. On the count of 3, I want you to raise your hand and I want to pray over you. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you. You're in good company. There's a lot of hands, a lot of hands. God, we come today. God, we come today as your kids, and that's it. God, we're just your children. We are your sons and we are your daughters. God, I pray over this room. I pray over our other locations. I pray over those that are physically gathered in Prescott Valley, that have responded saying, I have a dark side that I need Jesus today. Jesus, would you be faithful today? As they push through that crowd and they get to you, would you be faithful today to meet them in that space? Would you be faithful to provide what they need? Would you be faithful to expose the dark side of their heart? God, for those in the room that are going, man, I want Jesus, I want intimacy, but I don't know what my dark side is. God, would you use whatever you need to begin to expose it? That over these weeks together as we journey and walk alongside, that God, you would reveal what needs to be healed, just like you asked both of the people in the story, what about that? God, would you expose the dark side of our heart? Would you give us confidence to be honest? Would you give us confidence to let others in? And God, would you be faithful to heal? God, I'm so grateful that in my own life, in my own story, you're a way maker. God, that over the last month, that what I thought was a stroke, that was about my dad, God, you used to expose darkness. Thank you for being a way maker. Thank you for being a miracle worker. Thank you that even though I couldn't see it, you were working. Give us holy trust that in these moments as we worship, God, you and your Spirit is going to do the work that we need. That God, you will expose and you will restore and you will redeem. So God, as we worship, it's out of a grateful heart that we say thank you for the cross. Thank you for dying for us. Thank you for rescuing us. And thank you for securing our eternity. We love you. And everybody said, amen.